How can a country like Iran, with over $8 trillion in oil wealth, let its children grow up in slums, drowning in sewage? Welcome to NVL Travel Documentary. Today, we take you deep inside Iran's poorest oil cities, where the ground bleeds black gold, but the people are left with nothing. This isn't just poverty. This is betrayal. So where did the money go? And why do the slums keep growing? Stay with us until the end and decide for yourself. Number 1. The heart of Iran.
دیشب ما داخل سازمان ملل آمدیم. دیشب 12:30 اینجا آمده.
تو چرا ویزه میتی؟ ویزه میتی چرا با ویزه ارزش قائل نیستی؟
اذیت تو چی نمیکنه که بعد مدرسه دو بیادیش هم که ما رفتیم از خاطر کاروبار زیاد هم به خاطر مدرسه بچه‌ها رفتیم که مدرسه بسته شد.
If you want to find the true heart of Iran's oil empire, you need to look south toward Khuzestan province. This is not just another region on the map. It's Iran's industrial lifeline. Cities like Ahvaz, Abadan, and Khorramshahr aren't just cities, they're engines that have been pumping oil day and night for more than a century. Ahvaz, the capital of Khuzestan, sits atop one of the largest onshore oil fields in the world, the Ahvaz field. This single field alone accounts for nearly 1/3 of Iran's crude production, making it a cornerstone of the country's energy economy. In recent government reports published in early 2025, Khuzestan was credited with generating more than 80% of Iran's total oil revenue. Just a few kilometers away, Abadan tells its own story. Home to the legendary Abadan refinery, once the largest oil refinery on the planet, this city has been refining crude since the early 1900s. Even today, the refinery still handles hundreds of thousands of barrels per day, despite aging infrastructure and repeated wartime damage. Then there's Khorramshahr, once a vibrant trading hub on the banks of the Arvand River. While its port has struggled to recover from decades of conflict and sanctions, it remains strategically vital for oil exports and regional logistics. Together, these cities form the industrial triangle that keeps Iran's economy afloat. Without them, there would be no oil boom, no petrochemical exports, and no state budget to speak of. But here's the contradiction. Despite producing billions of dollars in oil wealth each year, these cities are still battling poverty pollution and chronic underdevelopment. So why is the heart of Iran's wealth also home to some of its deepest wounds? Next, we'll take you inside these oil cities to show you not just how they produce wealth, but how little of that wealth stays behind. Number 2. The rise of the slum. In a province that powers Iran's economy, you'd expect modern roads, clean neighborhoods, and decent housing. Instead, in cities like Khuzestan, the very province that powers Iran's economy, poverty isn't retreating, it's closing in. Here, what surrounds the oil refineries isn't prosperity, but desperation. From the sky, the view is revealing. Clusters of slums stretch outward, like scars wrapping around the industrial lungs of the nation. In Ahvaz, rusted rooftops and makeshift shelters stand just meters from towering oil refineries. Pipelines carry wealth beneath the ground, while above families struggle to find clean water, working toilets, or safe shelter. According to the latest data from UN Habitat and the Iranian Statistics Center, Khuzestan now contains more than 130 informal settlements, a number that has doubled in only 7 years. And these aren't temporary encampments. Urban experts now refer to them as living ecosystems not born from emergencies, but from decades of neglect, economic pressure, and systemic failure. Abdulreza Golpaygani, director of the Urban Renovation Company, admits that slums have become a serious and expanding reality across the country. He estimates that between 6.5 and 7% of Iran's total population lives in unregulated urban zones, although independent sociologists suggest the true figure may be far higher, especially in oil-rich but underserved provinces like Khuzestan. Even more alarming, Golpaygani has identified Khuzestan among the 5 provinces facing the most severe urban breakdown, alongside Tehran, Mashhad, Bandar Abbas, and Sistan and Baluchistan. However, the paradox deepens. While Khuzestan generates over 80% of Iran's oil revenue, its people are increasingly forced to build homes from scrap, raise children beside open sewage, and live without the very infrastructure their cities produce for others. These aren't just Iran's oil cities. They are also some of its poorest and most forgotten. Number 3. High inflation. For decades, Iran's disadvantaged communities were seen as a fringe concern. But today, they define the center of a growing national crisis. According to Mohammad Ali Mostafavi, former senior official at the Ministry of Energy, the number of underprivileged Iranians has skyrocketed from just 600,000 in the early 1990s to over 25 million today. In the eastern provinces, long-term drought and environmental degradation have forced entire rural populations to leave their lands behind. In the country's central heartlands, land subsidence, water scarcity, and collapsing farmland are pushing families into already overcrowded cities. And in places like Tehran, where housing is unaffordable and jobs are scarce, many of the displaced arrive only to join the ranks of the urban poor. Without access to reliable education, healthcare, or formal employment, millions find themselves trapped in a vicious cycle, migrating in search of opportunity only to end up in crumbling warehouses, slums, or even public restrooms repurposed as shelter. Between 2006 and 2016, the number of renter households in Iran jumped by 30%. And in Tehran alone, it soared by more than 42%, according to Mahmoud Mahmoudzadeh, Deputy Minister of Roads and Urban Development. But instead of urgent solutions, many officials have offered cold detachment. In a public statement reported by Tabnak in June 2020, then-Minister Mohammad Islami advised the homeless to wait to buy or rent until prices came down. Statement made as thousands were already living in garages and storage units. Housing prices, meanwhile, have exploded beyond imagination. One government-aligned expert stated on national television that over the past 40 years, real estate prices have increased by more than 10,000 times. And while inflation has risen, wages have not kept up, with housing costs growing at twice the rate of official inflation over the past 2 decades. The result is a massive wave of social displacement. Families who once had homes are now scattered across the outskirts of cities. Those who can't afford rent are forced into informal settlements, feeding the expansion of Iran's slums, especially in cities already considered among the poorest in the country. All this in a country with some of the richest oil reserves on Earth, a nation where pipelines carry billions of dollars underground, while life above the surface is defined by hunger, heat, and hopelessness. Number 4. Fear. Reaching social consequences. This isn't a temporary imbalance. It's the foundation of a self-reinforcing cycle, a poverty trap that grows stronger with each year of neglect. The most vulnerable aren't just being left behind, they're being pushed further away from any path out. As prices climb and essential services collapse, more and more families are slipping below the poverty line, not gradually, but suddenly. With few alternatives, they migrate to the edges of Iran's major cities, hoping for stability, but finding only overcrowded slums, polluted air, and dangerous infrastructure. Today, Iran faces one of the most urgent social emergencies in its modern history. According to recent UN warnings, more than 1/3 of Khuzestan's population could be living in slum or semi-slum conditions by the year 2030. That projection reflects not just displacement, but the normalization of deprivation. And while the crisis intensifies in urban slums, rural Iran is vanishing. In November 2024, a government report revealed that 31,000 villages across the country have already been abandoned out of a total of 69,000. A generation ago, 70% of Iranians lived in rural communities. Today, that number has reversed, and the cities they flee to are no longer cities of opportunity. The cost is staggering, not just in human dignity, but in national potential. An estimated 900,000 school-aged children are now out of the classroom. With education slipping out of reach, child labor and underground economies are on the rise. Meanwhile, addiction, mental illness, and youth crime are beginning to take root in neighborhoods that were never meant to exist in the first place. This isn't just about housing. It's about a future where generational poverty becomes the national standard, and where entire communities grow up surrounded by oil wealth but never benefit from it. Number 5. Water crisis. Once known for its fertile wetlands and thriving farmlands, Khuzestan was a major producer of wheat, sugarcane, and corn. But today, much of that agricultural promise has vanished, and with it, entire villages have disappeared. A major cause is the redirection of the Karen River, Khuzestan's largest and most vital waterway, toward Isfahan in central Iran. This diversion, combined with years of poor water management and environmental degradation, has turned vast rural areas into dust bowls. Without access to water, countless farmers have abandoned their lands, packing up their lives, and moving toward the edges of nearby cities in hopes of finding clean water, electricity, or even the smallest chance of starting over. Every summer, as the heat intensifies and water shortages worsen, new informal settlements begin to appear, often forming along drainage canals and sewage routes. These slums aren't part of any master plan. They are a default solution for families caught between climate breakdown and government failure. Over the past decade, Iran's water crisis has deepened due to over-extraction of groundwater, mismanaged dam projects, and a failure to adapt to climate change. Kaveh Madani, a former deputy director of Iran's environmental department, has stated that the crisis is the result of decades of short-term policy decisions, environmental negligence, and an alarming lack of foresight. What makes the impact even more severe is how water infrastructure is distributed. While large-scale agricultural producers and the oil industry maintain access to irrigation and reserves, small-scale farmers, ranchers, and fishing communities are often left to fend for themselves. The poorest are the first to suffer when the taps run dry, and the last to receive help. In July of 2021, these tensions erupted into protests. What began as water demonstrations in Khuzestan quickly spread to other provinces, becoming known as the Uprising of the Thirsty. The unrest lasted more than 10 days and turned violent when security forces intervened. Civilian casualties were reported, and the protests prompted rare national attention. In response, the government pledged emergency relief, releasing water from the Karkay Dam and sending temporary tanks to the worst-hit areas. But for thousands who had already left their villages and built homes from scraps beside polluted canals, those promises came too late. What you've seen so far is just the surface. The full story runs deeper. Stay with us. There's more you need to see. Number 6. Where pollution kills slowly. In the shadow of refineries and flare stacks, entire neighborhoods are slowly being poisoned. The slums on the outskirts of Ahvaz are more than overcrowded and impoverished. They are surrounded by pollution that kills not instantly, but over time. Soil samples taken near these settlements show concentrations of heavy metals up to 3 to 6 times higher than World Health Organization safety limits. Air quality is no better. Constant exposure to petrochemical dust and toxic emissions from flare stacks has created a public health disaster. Residents breathe air laced with oil particles, sulfur dioxide, and microscopic chemicals, any of which are linked to chronic respiratory illness, liver cancer, and cardiovascular disease. This is not new information. Back in 2011, the World Health Organization ranked Ahvaz as having the worst air quality of any city on Earth. Over a decade later, little has changed. Ahvaz remains among the world's most polluted cities, and the air here has been directly linked to increased mortality, particularly from heart disease and stroke. Once a lush corner of the Fertile Crescent, the region now resembles a post-industrial wasteland. Date palms and citrus orchards that thrived here for centuries have been reduced to brittle husks, killed off by airborne fungal infections clinging to polluted dust. The plains that once birthed the earliest agricultural civilizations have turned barren their soil, poisoned by decades of exposure to refinery runoff, drilling waste, and industrial discharge. A 10-year medical study confirmed what local families have long suspected. Hospital admissions for cardiovascular disease in Ahvaz have surged in direct correlation with rising toxic emissions. However, for tens of thousands who live in the slums, there is nowhere else to go. They can't afford to move, can't escape the contamination, and can't protect their children from breathing air that slowly destroys their lungs. It's not just poverty that keeps them here. It's the absence of any alternative. Number 7. Education is broken in Khuzestan. One of Iran's richest provinces in oil revenue, the education system is quietly breaking down, especially in the slums and remote villages. The province now ranks among the highest in the country for school dropout rates, a crisis made worse by poverty displacement and collapsing infrastructure. In Bavi County, just east of Ahvaz, more than 37 villages have been cut off from basic services since a major flood in 2019 destroyed the area's only floating bridge. Since then, both students and teachers have been forced to cross rivers by boat or makeshift rafts, a daily risk that has led to 20% of students dropping out, most of them girls. According to local reports, the governor of Bavi admitted that the county lacks the resources to rebuild the bridge and can only wait for the army. One of those students is Zainab, a 13-year-old girl who travels across the Karun River each morning with her younger brother. Their raft is built from wooden boards and plastic drums tied together by rope, a fragile symbol of a right to education slowly being washed away. Even in the slums of Ahvaz, the problem is no better. Many informal neighborhoods lack schools altogether. Others are too far from public services, forcing children to walk through industrial zones or flood-prone streets. Some classrooms operate in tents or warehouses without enough teachers' books or electricity. In both urban and rural areas, the collapse of education is pushing thousands of children out of school. Not because they want to leave, but because the system gives them no way to stay. Zainab still dreams of becoming a doctor, but without a safe classroom. Proper roads or political will that dream is slipping further out of reach. In a land that fuels the country with billions in oil, it is shocking how many children must cross rivers just to find a future, and how many never make it across. Number 8. Where did $8 trillion gone go? Over the past 4 decades, Iran has earned more than $8 trillion from oil exports, a figure that could have transformed any nation. But in Khuzestan, where much of that oil is pumped from the ground, daily life tells a very different story. Poverty, pollution, and neglect define the landscape. In the slums around Ahvaz and Abadan, families live without clean drinking water, proper housing, or functioning hospitals. Public infrastructure is scarce, employment is unstable, and in many neighborhoods, children grow up never knowing a working school. So where did the money go? A large portion of Iran's oil revenue has consistently been allocated not to civilian development, but to military expansion, foreign operations, and ideological projects. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, now one of the most powerful political and economic institutions in the country, receives massive state funding to support proxy forces in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. And now, amid escalating conflict with Israel in 2024 and 2025, a growing share of the national budget is once again being diverted toward war. As missiles fly between Tehran and Tel Aviv, and tensions mount along regional borders, the people of Khuzestan continue to wait for running water, for bridges that weren't rebuilt after the 2019 floods, for hospitals that never received promised upgrades, for schools that still operate in tents. In 2022, more than 1/4 of Iran's official budget was directed toward military and security institutions. In contrast, provincial development, particularly in ethnic minority regions like Khuzestan, remained underfunded, overlooked, and often deliberately deprioritized. Instead of roads and hospitals, what Khuzestan received was surveillance policing and silence. Investment has become a political decision, not an economic one. And so, the people who live among oil rigs, flare stacks, and pipelines are the ones with the least power to benefit from it. They provide the fuel for a geopolitical struggle, but get nothing but ash in return. Number 9. When slums become the normal. In Khuzestan, poverty is no longer a temporary setback. It's becoming a way of life passed from one generation to the next. And if nothing changes, the future may look even darker. According to a recent warning from the United Nations, if no urgent action is taken, more than 1/3 of Khuzestan's population could be living in slum or semi-slum conditions by the year 2030. That means millions of people growing up in environments without safe water, proper housing, reliable electricity, or access to education. And the bitter irony: these families live on top of the very resource that powers Iran's economy. Oil keeps the state running, funds its foreign policy, and sustains its global leverage. But the people who live nearest to the source often go without the basics needed to survive. Over time, this has created more than just economic stagnation. It's created a psychological fracture, one that is pushing Iran's most educated and skilled citizens to leave. With limited job opportunities, poor infrastructure, and little hope for change, young Iranians from across the country, including Khuzestan, are seeking futures abroad. This trend has become so widespread that experts now call it a national brain drain. Engineers, doctors, teachers, and university graduates are emigrating in growing numbers, taking with them the knowledge and innovation that Iran desperately needs to rebuild from within. Even among families living in slums, the dream is no longer to move to a better neighborhood, it's to leave the country entirely. And so, while the state continues to invest in oil wells, military ventures, and regional influence its human capital, the one resource that can't be drilled from the ground is slipping away. What kind of future can a nation expect when slums become the standard, not the exception? And its brightest minds see escape, not rebuilding, as the only way forward. Oh! What does it mean to live in a land that feeds a nation but starves its own people? This is not just a story about poverty. It's about what happens when a nation forgets its margins and turns its back on the very ground that holds it up. If this is the present, then the question remains: what kind of future is being built on these broken foundations? If this story moved you or made you think, don't forget to like and subscribe to NVL Travel Documentary, where we bring you the untold realities behind the places the world overlooks.